Hello, everyone. Steve Roehl with Southern Minnesota Beet Sugar Cooperative, and I'm here to initiate a 5-part series recapping the Cercospora Leafspot database information that we've collected over the past 2 years in 2019 and 2018. Please excuse me while I try to share my screen here. If you are familiar with this particular endeavor, we began it in 2019. Group of shareholders, some of your Southern Minnesota Beet Sugar colleagues, were willing to share some intimate details about their Cercospora Leafspot program with me, and I was able to go out and view their fields and give them a rating so that we could correlate their ratings and their relative success or lack of success in Cercospora Leafspot control to their specific inputs to be able to combine this information for the rest of the shareholders in the combined effort to try to control the disease and resume a more profitable production of sugar beet at Southern Minnesota Beet Sugar. As I mentioned, just like last year, this is going to be a multiple part series so that we can provide this in a more bite-sized pieces. It is a 2020 Cercospora Leafspot database review, as the title says, but we will be sprinkling in some combined 2019 and 2020 data throughout the course of the presentation. 5 parts. First one, emphasis on this current upcoming crop year with some significant input from what we've learned in the 2019 and 2018 Cercospora Leafspot recap. Part 2 and 3, we're going to talk about agronomic practice database-based best management practices, and then get into part 4 and deep dive into some adjuvant considerations. Lots of products on the market. We want to make sure we know what we're doing when we're adding a adjuvant to our tank, and then finish up with some information on our Cercospora Leafspot epidemiology. Now, if those of you that don't know that you're really all that enthused about learning about Cercospora Leafspot epidemiology, I do want to put a plug in. There is just a flat out outstanding video released by the American Phytopathological Society that animates and takes you right down on the leaf so you can fully understand how this disease operates, which gives us the opportunity to intimately know our enemy and to best provide the shock and awe we need from each one of our particular fungicide applications. Southern Minnesota Beet Sugar, trying to control Cercospora Leafspot over the decades has been a little bit like reading the tea leaves. You look inside and far too often you see this ominous little sinister fellow here frowning back at you. But I think in the last couple of years, I'm proud to say that I think that we have turned the tide a little bit, and we maybe turned that frown upside down. We're starting to feel a little bit more confident about our ability to take hold of the steering wheel and guide our own destiny. As I said, we're going to do a little bit of a state of the state on our 2021 condition as we go into this crop, utilizing some information from the databases, both in 2019 and 2018 in this first episode of 5 episodes. So I thought it'd be fun to do a little bit of flashback first. Okay, so actually it wasn't so fun following the 2018 crop. 2 of the previous 3 years had epidemic levels of Cercospora Leafspot, and of course, we know what kind of devastating impact that had on our beet payments. Even in 2017, where we would call it an acceptable crop year, with acceptable profits, there were significant losses due to the late season onset of the disease. We were not able to completely control it throughout the season long, and it came back to bite us at the end of the season. At that point, after the 2018 epidemic, I could think that most of us would have said that it would be an understatement to say that the future looked difficult, if not perilous in some situations. If I was to symbolize where we were sitting after that 2018 crop, I think many agriculturists, agronomists, and shareholders would be indicating that they needed some little bit of help after watching their early season good crop, green crop back there in the background by the silo, turn brown due to the devastating effects of Cercospora Leafspot. We were starting to talk to ourselves and maybe need to talk to some psychiatric help. And the reason was because we really didn't know. It was a wicked problem, meaning we really had a problem, but we didn't have a readily available solution at our hands to try to be able to right our ship and return to profitable sugar beet production. So if we look at those 3 years that we've encountered since that 20 2018 epidemic, I could say that I think most of us would say what a ride it has been. And to symbolize the way we were feeling after that 2018 crop, I think that we might say that we were boldly going forward because we couldn't find reverse. In fact, nobody wanted to look in the rearview mirror. Why should we? We were forced to look forward. We needed to figure out ways to grab a hold of the steering wheel and guide our own destiny. If I was to try to symbolize where we sit today, heading into the Cercospora Leafspot season for 2021, maybe using the word overconfidence is a little bit overzealous, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that we should not go into this particular season overconfident by the successes we've had in 2019 and 2020. If we look at this particular mouse and make that a symbolic to the SMBSC, we do feel that we have earned or gained a little knowledge on how to control this disease. That might be represented by the helmet. And that helmet gives us a little bit of confidence or faith that we might just be able to steal a little bit of profitability represented by the cheese there. But we let's not forget that the trap represents Cercospora Leafspot is formidable and it's powerful. And even at our best efforts, sometimes we cannot control this particular disease. So we should not be going into this crop overconfident, but we should be going into the crop knowing that if we do things right, we have a better chance of being able to be profitable as we did in 2020. 2021, just like all years, but 2021, in my opinion, is particularly pivotal. We've had a pretty successful crop now in 2020, and we want to prove that that was not a fluke. There's a little bit of pride at stake. We feel that we have made some drastic measures and taken some drastic strides towards controlling this disease. And now there's a little bit of pride that steps in, showing that we can do this for a third year in a row by reducing inoculum, getting ahead of the disease and preventing it from getting a foothold in our fields. We have worked hard and we have to be proud of what we have achieved thus far, but the work is not done. Thus, in 2021, it really comes down to what we're going to need to do is commit to staying diligent and to disprove all of the naysayers who think that 2020 was just basically a lucky draw, or that we basically had avoided the disease because Mother Nature gave us a good luck of the draw on that particular year. So going forward with 2021, I do have some caution statements after a relatively satisfactory control in 2019 and 2020 when compared to the previous 3 years. I think some people think that we are just basically in a low incidence disease cycle. Okay. And then there are others that feel that the late planting in 2019 and the dry conditions in 2020 maybe provided us with a reprieve from the epidemics and the epidemic situations that we had been operating under in the previous years. But regardless of where your opinion resides, I don't want anyone to be misled to think that we might have this disease hogtied. I spent a lot of time talking about that already, but if we think that we have it hogtied, I think we need to realize that in reality, perhaps all we really have is that we have the cat by the tail at this point. And if you go back to what Mark Twain says, catching a cat by its tail, you might think you have caught the cat, but in reality, in doing so, all that we really accomplish is to learn things we can't be learned in any other way. Meaning that if you're going to hold on to a cat by its tail, you're going to get turned around and get scratched. And with Cercospora Leafspot, it's done it to us so many different times that lets us not feel that we have the cat by the tail. We have to go into this thing with every bit of due diligence that we had going into 2020 season. If I was to discuss the Cercospora Leafspot that we've tried to accomplish in the 2019 and 2020, it really deals with the 35 cooperators that are willing to share with us the intimate details of their Cercospora Leafspot program. Across 173 fields in 2020, they filled in a lot of information that is not required by the regular database to give us detailed information that we could comb through to tease out some of the best management practices for the rest of the cooperative shareholders to be able to control this disease. As you can see, they're fairly well distributed. I apologize that there weren't a good representation south of the Minnesota River. There was every intention to do so, but I will take responsibility because there was a little bit of a mix-up. Assuredly that in 2021, when we do this, I will make sure that we have a good representation there south of the river. But basically, these 35 shareholder operations, they input some very specific Cercospora Leafspot data on every one of their fields at great additional work on their part. I was able to go out and visit those fields then and give a visual rating so that we could correlate the visual rating to their program program effectiveness to their specific BMTs, in some cases to be able to determine which ones particularly work well and which ones maybe not so well. I think it would be prudent right now to provide some acknowledgments. I think I need to thank the Shareholder Innovation Committee. They were the ones that came up with the idea. They were a group of shareholders after the 2018 season that determined that there was some opportunity for them to help guide the activities of the research department and of myself to be able to figure out ways to make everyone better. It was through their guidance to decide to go out there and start to accumulate some of this information that we currently are perusing in these 5 segments that will be coming out in this video series. I also would be ill-advised to forget. It would be an oversight on my part to forget Jody Steffel, the GIS and statistical analyst, who basically helps me to put together all of these maps and then helps me to sort through all of this data. And then a special thanks again to all of those cooperators that go the extra mile to input all of this information and allow me to go out into their fields and make scouting reports and to visually evaluate their field for their Cercospora Leafspot control. To summarize 2019, 2020 in a simple slide, in 2019, I visited 157 fields. There were 157 fields that we gathered data from. 2020, there was 173. The average Cercospora Leafspot rating of the 2019 fields was about a 3.2. In 2020, it was 3.3. I have to say that I tip my hat to all of you for this type of level of Cercospora Leafspot control. This is not the level of control we were getting in the past. And certainly in 2020, I want you to know that when we consider that you planted your crop all within about a 5-day period, and most of you were reaching canopy by mid-June, to be able to get season-long control of Cercospora Leafspot and maintain a 3.3 score is admirable, to say the least. We'll cover more about the adjuvants in series part number 4, but I do want to mention that of the fields that saw speckling, which is generally considered a pretty telltale sign that you were using a deposition aid, particularly with your triphenyl tin hydroxide products, that we did see a marked decrease in Cercospora Leafspot severity in those fields, indicating that there is some value perhaps to being able to add a deposition aid to assure that more of our droplets are reaching the leaf. Here is the combined data in graphic form. So in the next 2 slides, you're going to see 4 graphs, and all 4 of them will have the same basic premise. Along the left y-axis, we generally have the variable measured. In this case, it's sugar from low to high. And from left to right, we have Cercospora Leafspot severity or category from low on the left side to high on the right side. If we look at sugar content in particular, and I might mention that these numbers inside the graph represent the number of fields across these 2 years that represent each database point. So after 2 years now, we are starting to get a pretty robust level of input or data coming from field count. And as you can see, we have a not too bad R-squared or correlation coefficient. So that means that there's a pretty good correlation to decreasing sugar content as we see increased severity of Cercospora Leafspot. And you can see that there's anywhere from about a 0.4 to a 0.5 reduction in sugar content as Cercospora Leafspot ranges from a 2 category all the way up to a 6. And again, a pretty decent correlation. Purity was not as tightly correlated, but you can still generally see the very basic trend line downward with purity with increasing Cercospora Leafspot. None of this is all that surprising, but I think it's really validating when you get to see it in a graphic form over 2 years of data. Now, if we switch to tons per acre, again, we have tons per acre on the y-axis here from low to high with increasing Cercospora Leafspot infection values. Again, the numbers indicate number of fields, same data set, but you can see we have a much tighter regression coefficient here at a 0.87, meaning that there's a very tight correlation to increasing Cercospora Leafspot severity and decreasing tons. And you can see that this is a 3 to 3.5 ton per acre penalty for allowing for Cercospora Leafspot to get a foothold in your field and starting to exceed certain levels of infection. ESA has a very similar R-squared value. Here we're showing a full 1,000 pounds of extractable sucrose per acre by allowing your beet field to traverse from a 2 category to a 6 category. But before we leave this slide, let me bring to your attention these particular slippery slopes. See how steep the slope gets there between a category 4 and a category 5 Cercospora Leafspot rating? I think that's interesting and worthy of a little bit more deeper dive into that particular segment of this data set. So I bring in this same data that you just saw in the last 4 slides. All of it is contained here. You see the field count and the ratings and the tons and the sugar and the purity. but it's now in tabular form. And what I want to bring to your attention is that particular slippery slope that we looked at in tons per acre and extractable sucrose per acre when it comes to the actual values. If we take a look at that particular transition, you can see that there's a drastic drop to tons per acre sugar, and that's what leads to the rather large drop in extractable sucrose per acre of almost a full 1,000 pounds across that particular range. I took the liberty of going to the shareholder portal and going to the profitability calculator. That is the calculator that all of you have access to determine the relative profitability of particular fields or of your whole operation. And what I did was input these numbers to generally speaking, determine a financial penalty for each incremental increase in your particular Cercospora Leafspot rating. And what I found, and is something that I think you're all going to find rather interesting. If and when by allowing your Cercospora Leafspot, at least by these particular fields in the database, to move from a 2.0 to a 3.0 rating, just one single Cercospora rating increase from a 2 to 3, there was a $34 per acre penalty to the relative revenue per acre. Perhaps not drastic in and of itself, but when you start now to look at the detrimental or the financial penalty to allowing your field to go from a 3 to a 4 being another $63 an acre, now we've reached almost $100 per acre for allowing for your field to go from a 2 to a 4. But it's when we go from a category 4 to a category 5 where we see that slippery slope in the graphs, and we can start to really put some financials on this. The financial penalty for allowing your field to simply go from a 4 to a 5, based upon the database information, is $224. Now, if you add that all up, we're well in excess of $300 per acre for allowing your field to go from a 2 to a 5. That is pretty drastic information right there, and it starts to really grab your attention in the interest of trying to start early and prevent the disease from ever actually getting a foothold into your field. I'm not certain why there's only a $13 per acre penalty from going to a 5 or 6, but it's probably highly related to the fact that we only had 15 fields that had a greater than 6 over the past 2 years. And to that, I tip my hat because that's a pretty damn good job. All right, so that all taken into consideration, I think it would be fair to have a conversation about what we thought we knew about Cercospora Leafspot. This goes all the way back to the 80s after the benzimidazole resistance issues, and they did a lot of work out of University of Minnesota and the NDSU. And after doing all this work, they came out with a category rating scale that we currently use, and we all have gotten quite familiar with. And when we look at this, their determination is that we weren't reaching a proven economic damage till we reached category 6. However, based upon the information that you just observed us talking about there between what happens at Southern Minnesota Beet Sugar at fields where they transition from a category 4 to a category 5, I think that it would be easy to say that we need to be making sure that that we recognize that our economic threshold may actually be someplace around a 4 or 5. Again, recognizing the extreme importance to getting out early and deterring or delaying the onset of the disease to make sure it never gets a foothold in our field. I thought you might find it of interest to look at the standard distribution curve of the fields, of those 173 fields in 2020, as it relates to the Cercospora Leafspot rating. If I was to carry out the bell-shaped curve, I think that you'll note that there's a pretty favorable skew to the bell-shaped normal distribution curve, showing that the vast majority of you were able to keep this disease in check, somewhere at a 3 or below. And very few of you actually got above what we call that new economic threshold of a category 4 or a category 5. So again, good job in control of Cercospora Leafspot in 2020. I want to bring you back to the basic motto that we entered the 2020 crop with, and that was a paradigm shift away from philosophies that base success solely upon products and techniques that maximize efficacy and ideal spray conditions. I want to tell you that our research department needs to conduct their research trials in ideal conditions so that when we do see a difference, we know that it has to do with a particular product or a particular program. But in reality, we know that in real life, in your fields, you're not able to spray in ideal conditions. Therefore, we need to make that shift to those particular, to spend more time on, focus significantly more attention on products and techniques that are less likely to experience critical failure when conditions are not ideal, which are the conditions that are far more common in your field. We know that if we have even just one critical failure early on in your particular program, it can relate to devastating effects on maintaining control of the field season long to allow you to gain the profitability, the crop that you expect and deserve. If you remember, going into 2020, I had an acronym. I have an acronym for everything. It was called Getting Set for Success. The set stood for some of the techniques and the inputs and the ideas that we could implement in regard to the spray day conditions, to the equipment that we use, and the technique that we use it in, okay? So but this year, we're going to still use the same acronym, but this time it's going to stand for strategies, expectations, and tactics. And getting into that, let's talk about some of the summaries from this particular part one of our 5-part series. First of all, again, 2021 is a pivotal year from a pride perspective. We need to prove that the improvements to our techniques and strategies have been integral in our recent success controlling Cercospora Leafspot in 2019 and 2020. I think it's vital that we remain diligent and avoid any and all temptations towards complacency. Cercospora Leafspot has been a formidable opponent and has come back to bite us in the past, and I'm certain it's waiting for every opportunity that it can to come back and beat us again. The 2-year combined data, I think that you recall that those graphs that I was showing you reinforces the incredible impact that increasing Cercospora Leafspot severity values or levels can have on our bottom line. If you think about those tons per acre, those sugar graphs, that ESA graph can incredibly decrease our ability to produce extractable sucrose and gain a profit by its production. The SMBSC Agronomic Practice Database, the Cercospora Leafspot Special Database, would put into question the long-held belief that Category 6 represents our economic damage threshold. I would say that the data would strongly suggest that we are experiencing economic damage as early as 4 or 5 on the category scale. And then lastly, for 2021, we just need to basically stick with a strong focus on our attention to detail and the tried and true strategies that assist with the avoiding of the critical failure that occur on any one field or on any one particular application. So with that, I want to thank you for taking a viewing of this part one, and I want you to look forward to taking a look at our part 2 of our particular series on best management practices. So with that, I'm going to stop share here, and I'll pause recording, and we'll see you next time.